All right, welcome everybody to another edition of the Queer Profits Podcast. I am excited as always. I'll get to that here in just a minute with the special guest that we have today. Just a quick reminder, 3 pillars that we talk about always with Queer Profits is inclusion, community, and growth. And remember, you can't have growth in your business without growing as a person. And so you're going to hear a lot, I think, about that in the interview today with my good friend, Kathleen Gage. So Kathleen, welcome. Thank you very much for doing this with me. I'm so excited to have you.
Well, I'm excited to be here, Diane. It's like, and I love Queer Profits. I love that name. And we were talking about what that word queer means, and we'll get into that.
Good. So go ahead and introduce yourself. You and I have known each other, gosh, I don't know, 10, 12 years?
Oh, at least.
Maybe
I think
longer
we go
than
back
that.
Further
so,
than that. I think when we start saying, 20 years, it just lets us know how
right.
old we're
It just
getting.
sounds too
It's
much.
Like, holy cow. But actually, I live in a very small town in Oregon, in Central Oregon, with my wife of 30 years. We actually were one of the first couples to get legally married when it became a thing that you could do. But I have been in business 25 years. I've lived in California, Utah, which is interesting because that was kind of like the Twilight Zone. We were going to go there for a year. We stayed 15, and it was a great experience. And I actually work with bona fide experts who want to, if you will, they want to come out of their own closet of being invisible to being visible. And I don't necessarily work with any particular segment of the population other than they have to be bona fide experts. And what I mean by that is they have to have been doing what they do for anywhere from 5, 10, 20, 30 years. Photographers, artists, writers, business consultants, but very specific in what they do.
Very cool. So because you and I have known each other for so long, I know a lot about kind of some things about your life when you were younger and kind of how you progressed and some of that. Not all the details, I'm sure. But let's talk a little bit before we get into the business aspect of this, because you really have made a huge transition over the course of, your lifetime. And so I know in the stories and things that you've told me, when you were younger, kind of doing the whole drinking and partying kind of scene. And so talk a little bit about kind of where you were in that part of your life, and then we'll move into kind of you as the business owner.
Absolutely. Well, and with the word transition, it's like that's an interesting word for this audience. But actually, there was a big transition because I actually have been married to men twice. And it was at a time when, when I grew up, I'm going to be 66 in a few months. And when I grew up, it was not okay to be gay. It just wasn't okay. And it wasn't that that was necessarily something that we heard all the time, but you just kind of knew. And so for me, what I did is I wanted to be the normal person. And so in doing that, I just got involved in some lifestyle choices that were not necessarily the best lifestyle choices. And a lot of it had to do with just being able to deal with who I was and realizing that I was able to escape through drugs and alcohol. So in my teens, I was introduced to not only boys, but I was introduced to drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And with the drugs and alcohol, it actually took me down a path and a road that I ended up homeless. In my 20s, I ended up very unemployable. I didn't go a day without drinking. I was a blackout drinker. I was a fall down drunk. And, when I tell that to people today with where my life is today, because I've been sober for 36 years, a lot of people go, oh, no, that's not possible. It's like, oh, yes, it is possible. And if you've ever known somebody in your own family who's an alcoholic, you know that if somebody gets sober, they become a whole different person. They become who they're really meant to be. And I remember when I first got sober, barely having made it out of high school. I tried college a couple of times, could never stay sober long enough to make it to class. And when I first got into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I needed to get some work. And I literally was digging ditches, literally. I had a friend who was in recovery and she had a gardening business and she needed to dig trenches for a water system. And she said, I'll pay you cash and would you be willing to go to work for me? And lo and behold, that's what I did when I got my first, if you real job. And then just by not drinking, I started seeing things from a whole different perspective. And I was fortunate enough to get a sponsor, which nowadays we would call that a mentor or a coach. In business, we would call it a mentor or coach, somebody who guided me along to where I needed to go. And she helped me to basically get my life together to a point that I remember the first job that I interviewed for, I didn't have the skill set necessarily, but I had the drive and the passion. And when I was in the interview, the sales manager, it was for a radio station, she said, well, why should I hire you? You don't have the experience that we need. You don't have the skill set. And I said, because if you do, I'll be the hardest worker that you've ever had. And I was so committed to that. And she said, tell me about your greatest failure. And for some reason, I told her I was in recovery. And I said, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but something's telling me I should share this with you. But I'm sober and I'm trying to turn my life around. I just need a break in life. And she goes, I'm in recovery too. And that was the thing that really connected us to where she said, I'm going to trust you. She goes, and I know you're not going to let me down. And that's all I needed. I just needed somebody to give me a break.
Yeah. Somebody to believe in you, right? Somebody to believe in you.
Absolutely. And since that time in our business, we've made millions of dollars. And I'm going back to a time that I couldn't get a job. I couldn't pay my bills. I ended up on the streets, and I've built a multiple six-figure business. And it has not always been a bed of roses. There's been times that, we'd have just incredible months of making $50,000, $60,000, and then going into an old behavior of self-sabotaging. So I'd quit making the phone calls. I'd quit taking the action that created the success. And that's something I've learned in business is you have to be consistent in your behaviors in order to create the success that you want.
Yeah. So how did you go from having the job, whichever job it was, to now thinking I should own my own business? How'd you make that transition?
Oh, a moment of insanity. It was like, well, and it's so interesting that question because I progressed very rapidly. I tend to have a very addictive personality, and when I go into something, I go in 100%. And as I was moving along in my career, I found myself taking risks that were just, you'd think like, why are you applying for a job at a corporation when you've never worked in a corporation before? And I ended up getting an entry-level job, and within a very short period of time got promoted and was managing a division, and one thing led to another. And I had a boss when I was working in a corporation in Utah. It was GTE Health Systems, and I was in the trade show division, and I wanted to get into the demonstration division. I wanted to be a demonstrator for the software that we sold. It was a multi-million-dollar software package for healthcare systems. And this boss he did this to everybody. He just would do everything that he could to prevent you from fulfilling your purpose. And he goes, who do you think you are to be a demonstrator? You couldn't give a good presentation if you had to save your life on that. I mean, just a real negative person. And I realized that the only way that I was really going to be able to do what I wanted to do was to start my own business. And I did it in a way that I don't recommend people do. I actually left the job. They were having a layoff, and they said, we need people to lay off. Can we lay you off? And I'm like, okay. And they were going to give me a severance package, which gave me a few months of breathing room. And I basically went from the security of a regular paycheck, I every 2 weeks I got my paycheck, to where now I was out on my own and I was flying by the seat of my pants. And I don't recommend that to people in most cases, because there are so many resources available today that can help somebody to lay a solid foundation before they make that big leap.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I say the same thing about, having gone from working for somebody else, doing the same kinds of things, but to, no net. I mean, I left without a net, without a client, without a product, without anything. And I often say the same thing, I don't necessarily recommend this, but, if you are entrepreneurial and if you do have that sort of, kind of go get them, I'm going to do this, no fail attitude. Sometimes it's the best thing that you can do, because you force yourself out of that situation where you have the comfort, where you have the safety, where you have the, I often say comfortable is the worst situation you can ever be in, right? That should make you very uncomfortable. But it's interesting that you just said that. So.
Well, and it's interesting because when you run a business, I've had my business for 25 years now, and you get to a place where you think you have it all figured out, and then something happens. Like when 9/11 happened, that really crushed a lot of businesses in more ways than one. 2008 was a big downturn for the economy for a lot of people, and those are the times where when you think you have it figured out, for me, I know what is true for me is if I get too arrogant around what I'm doing and I'm thinking, oh, I'm all that. And trust me, I've been there where I think, I've got it all figured out. What's wrong with those people for not figuring it out? And life has a way of knocking me on my butt and saying, really, let's see if you're going to figure this one out.
Let's see how smart you are.
Yeah. And I think the main thing to keep in mind is that you have kind of a toolbox of resources that you can draw upon that help you to get to the other side of difficult situations. And one of the simplest tools and the most profitable tools I have is the phone. When I pick up the phone and I call people, I oftentimes make money as a result of that, because it's all about connection. And I think today that we've really lost sight of that with all that's available with technology. We think that all we have to do is press a button and we're going to make money. That can happen, but is it sustainable? And I think that's a big key for a lot of people. Are you setting your systems up in a way that you're sustainable?
And to your point, right, it's all about the relationship, which we've lost, right? Because everybody wants to do this in the technology way, as opposed to reach out and touch that person. People are amazed when you send a handwritten thank you card, or when when they get a phone call from you or whatever. It's like, wow, you're calling me?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just did that the other day. I was sharing that I went to Debbie Allen's 3-day event, a phenomenal event. And I actually hand wrote a thank you card just saying, hey, really enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me. It was a great event. And then there were a couple of other people. One woman recently lost her father-in-law, so I sent a card on that. Another person lost his dog. And so, just taking the time to let people know that you think of them, that you care. And it's one of those things a lot of people say, oh, I should do that. Well, put it on your to-do list. If I know there are things I need to do, it goes right on my to-do list. And it's like, okay, that's going to get done.
Yeah. Interesting. I did that in 2008 every Friday. And I put it on my calendar. And interestingly, somebody actually gave me grief about it, but I put on my calendar to mail on Friday. I mailed a letter to somebody, a business associate, a personal, it didn't matter. It was just handwritten, and I made a phone call.
Right.
I did that for the entire year. And interestingly enough, I had somebody say to me, well, if you have to put it on your calendar, doesn't that kind of take away from I'm like, no, it's
Wow.
my reminder, right? Of cause I know me well enough to know I'm very task oriented. And so the people side of it, if I don't put notes like that, sometimes gets left out. It doesn't mean that I don't care. It just means that I'm so focused, right, on that. And I'm very tied into my calendar. And so what's on my calendar is what I do. And so, that's just, it worked for me. I found the system that worked for me,
Well, and it's the same with when you go to the grocery store. If you don't take a list with you, you tend to spend more than you were going to spend. Right. And you buy stuff that you didn't plan on buying, right. And you forgot the things that you really needed. And, there's plenty of studies in social proof that a shopping list really helps us to stay on target. And especially if we're focused on eating healthy, I think that's a really important key to the health of a business, the health of our body, the health of a relationship. It's just like with relationships. I've been in a 30-year relationship, and there are things that I have to remember to do in order to keep the relationship healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it amazing how so many things in our lives we can equate like that, right? It's whether it's business, whether it's health, whether it's eating, whether it's, relationship. There's so many things that cross over. And if you're successful in one, you can make successful in the other with a little bit of thought, as opposed to either or, right? Which is what so many people think. Well, I can be successful in business, or I can have a relationship. No, you can be successful in both.
Trust me, happy wife, happy life. You know,
There
it's
you
like,
go.
and running a successful business keeps my wife very, very happy. It's like, you know, there's a direct correlation to that.
Yeah, there certainly is. So, Kathleen, talk a little bit about, because I love this fact that the longevity piece, right? Because of, you know, not everybody stays in business as long as we've been in business. So talk for a minute about how you've made those shifts that you need. Because look, business is different, as we talked about earlier, right? Way different now than it was even 5 years ago.
Right.
So how have you maintained that longevity? What's the business secret, if you will, to doing that?
That is such a great question. I would say, first of all, I'm an avid learner. I'm constantly reading, I'm studying, and I'm putting the right information into my mind. I think that's a really important key. A big difference between when I first started out to now is I invest in mentors. Early on, it was always on a shoestring budget. It was like, oh, I can't afford this, I can't afford that. Now it's like, I can't afford not to. And over the years, like you, I've invested a boatload of money in mentors. Some have been great, some not so great, but I learned something from each one. And the big key for me is when I make an investment, I'm going to do everything I can to get a return on that investment. So having mentors is a big thing. Being a part of masterminds. You and I were in a mastermind together, and which required that I flew from where I live in Oregon to oftentimes Atlanta, and usually it was either in the South or the East Coast. So it wasn't an inexpensive proposition, but it was well worth the investment. Which really tied in with surrounding myself with people who would raise me up. Oftentimes what we do in order to make ourselves feel good is we'll put ourselves in an environment where we're the most successful person in that group. And the real key is to put yourself in a group where you're forced to raise your own bar, where you're forced to grow, or you have to go away. I mean, it just, there's no two ways about it. And so I would say those have been some of the keys to my success. And consistency. It's like knowing that I have to show up every day. I have my own home office. And for a while, for about 4 years, I moved my office out of my home. And that was good during that period of time because I was doing a lot of VIP days where clients would come and see me. And so at that time, that worked for me. But my office is my office. It is not used for anything but my business. And everybody knows that. It's like, except the animals, you know, they still haven't gotten that that memo. But so creating an environment that supports the business mindset, and also having office hours. I mean, this whole thing of like, oh, we get to pick our own hours, and you know, it's like, well, what 20 hours initially do you want to work? I mean, because in the beginning I was working 16, 18, 20 hours a day. And now I have a start time and an end time, and I really do have, if you will, silos of time that are dedicated to different things in my life. But for me, what's really important is my health. And if I take care of my health first, that spills over into my business. So every morning I either am running, I'm going to the gym, I'm doing yoga, I'm doing something that supports my physical and emotional health. And that moves into what I do in my business. I think also really understanding what your business is about and realizing in some cases, and this has been a big one for me, I don't have to work so hard that, and it's not about working smarter, it's just like energetically, I think sometimes when we have all this money coming to us, we're like, did I really earn it? And looking at what our own self-worth is and what our own belief in our value is that we bring to the experience.
You know, there's so much about what you just said that I love, right? One of the things, you didn't use this word, but I'm going to use it, is discipline, right? And so, and yet you also have this piece of flexibility. So, you know, you get up in the morning and you exercise. I exercise in the evenings when I finish, right? So I typically finish between 4 and 4:30 because the dogs want to be fed at 4:30. Not a moment later.
I get it. I get it.
So I feed them, I change my clothes, and I go to the gym. And I do that consistently 4 days a week. And so like this week, right, typically I'm Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday at the gym lifting weights. And this week I have something on Thursday. So I'm going to modify, and it's going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, right? And then the off day and the weekends are cardio days for me. But I love the fact that it still works, right? You have done what works for you, which is get up and do it in the morning, which a lot of people do. And I do sometimes if I'm forced to, right? Like if I have something in the evening, I have to get my workout in, but my body just works better in the afternoons. And so I love that we're doing the same things and yet we're doing them differently, right? And I think the lesson is do what works for you. I'm like you, right? Same thing with the office hours. Like I'm pretty much at my desk from 9 to 4. Now there are days if I schedule something that I have to be out of the office or whatever, there's a piece of my brain that feels guilty sometimes, right? It's like, why aren't you at the office? And yet I have now over time, this has taken me a while to do, but over time I'm like, Diane, you can work from 7 to 9 tonight if you need to, or you don't have to put in an 8-hour day today. You've earned that, or I can work on a Saturday if I choose to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A couple of other things that I think are important for people to really look at setting up their structure in a way that it's a real business is we have an accountant. We pay income tax. We pay ourselves. So we pay income tax. We pay quarterly taxes. And we have an accountant that makes sure that everything is squeaky clean. I think that's a really important part of running a business. We also, we just have systems in place that create a real business, where a lot of times when people get into business or they have this vision of what it's like to run a business, they don't set it up where it has the real business structures. They don't get a DBA. They don't set themselves up as a corporation. All of those help to create the energy of a real business.
Yeah. And I even love the fact that you do the same thing I do, right? You have an office. I have an office and it's in the house, but it's the office, right?
Right.
I don't work from the couch. I don't work from my bed. I sit at my desk in the office. And when I'm done, I close the door to the office, right? And in some ways for me, it's the physical closing of the door that says to me, okay, I can shut that piece off now. Cause look, I don't believe that balance is a thing, right? I mean, I just don't believe that every single day of your life there's balance. There isn't. That's a myth. And yet, like you, right, there's these triggers for me. And when I close that office door, now, although my mind doesn't automatically shut off, but related to business, there's this piece of, okay, now I'm in the house, right? Now I can be with the dogs. Now I can do my social things. Now I can do, I can go read. I can do whatever, because the work day per se, that I did in the office space is now over.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to have that separation because early on when we were running the business, Karen was in the business with me and I didn't know how to shut things down. And I mean, I took it to the dinner table. I took it into the bedroom. I took it everywhere. And she's like, I can't do this. This is, she has a whole different personality than I do. Thank God. I couldn't be in a relationship with myself. It's like, oh, that would be crazy. But she was really good at setting boundaries. And we actually, we were very focused on what do we need to do to have a good relationship and have a good business. And I had to learn to say no. We set rules of like, we don't talk business at the dinner table, period. And I can't remember the last time that I actually sat at the dinner table and talked business because it's not that important at the dinner table. It's important when I'm in my office.
Right. And, it's interesting too, because, you and I also share this, I worked with my former partner for 15 years and you guys worked together for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it's a different, vibe. It's a different situation. And you've got to set, I think, those boundaries of, here's what because as you said, I took it to the dinner table. I took it into the bedroom, pretty soon that starts to weigh on the person who's not your personality type, that's driven and, and that's all you think about. So
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, because your business has changed a lot as mine has, right, in the 25 years. So talk about how sort of that has evolved and kind of where you started and what you've done in the interims and what you're doing now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, one thing that has remained the same is I'm a speaker. So I am on the platform speaking. And now the platform has changed to where, or it's grown to where it's not only on a physical platform with an audience in front of me at a conference, but it can be through webinars, it can be through podcasting. So that's something that has always been a thread through my business. But as far as the services I offer, when I first started out, I was working with a lot of mid-sized businesses because I came out of corporation, so I immediately went into mid-sized and larger businesses. I worked with a lot of government entities, whether they be municipalities, state agencies, or federal agencies. And that's what I thought my business would always be about. But then I got the bug for writing. And once I started writing, I had authors coming to me saying, well, how did you do that? Because I did an Amazon launch, let's say, 15 years ago, and it was very successful. But again, there was a lot of work behind the scenes, but it was back in the day when you'd get a lot of joint venture partners, and, most people got 20 or 30, I got 102. It's like if a little is good, a lot is better. Not necessarily, but we did very, very well, I have to say. And doing that launch put me on the map as not only an author, but as a launch manager. So I had clients that would hire me to teach them how to do a launch or do the launch for them. So for a period, I was doing a lot to do with Amazon and how to get your book to bestseller, and then how to make that a profitable revenue stream on the back end. Then I got into teaching people how to do their own self-staged events, because we were doing quite well with that, where I'd do an information product on marketing. It always went back to marketing. And we would do our self-staged events. What we call the dog and pony show. We'd have a product to sell, a physical product at the front of the room. People would make a mad dash for the back of the room. You'd pick up $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And I'm like, oh, this is a great day's work. But the thing is there was a lot that went into that $20,000 day.
Right. A lot of
yeah, and I'll tell you what a big shift for me was when I got a mentor who really taught me how to sell from the platform. I went from thinking a really good day was 20,000 at an event to where the last event I did was $250,000. So that was the benefit of having a mentor who helped me to dial into a few things that I was missing and fine tune. So what I do now, after all is said and done, my big area of focus is I work with experts, as I mentioned, who want to get a lot of visibility through podcast interviews. And it could be that they do a podcast tour for their book. It could be that they want to promote a product. Maybe they just have a message. I have one client that her whole thing is teaching people how to use less gasoline to turn the situation with the environment around. She wrote a book called Fueling Change, and she's in her 70s. And so I'm teaching her how to go out and find those opportunities. So that's a big focus. Another big focus for me is that I'm doing some stuff within the plant-based industry. I'm a plant-based eater, have been for about 15 months now. It's been a game changer for me. And so I'm in the process of partnering with some people on some product development, on some podcast shows, some things that we're going to be doing. But the whole thread through it all is about visibility. Quit hiding out, basically come out, regardless of what closet you need to come out of, and package your message in a way that you can present a story to people that they enjoy consuming, if you will.
So how do you know, as a business owner, how do you know when it's time to make those, because they weren't huge jumps, right? You didn't go from I'm a plumber to now I'm going to go sell bicycles, right? They were shifts, right? They weren't these huge, like, shifts of going to completely different things, but they were these small shifts in kind of the business that you were doing. And yet you made these changes that took you to a different place inside of the industry as things change. So how do you know when the right time is and what the right shift is to make?
Oh, that is such a great question. I would say that sometimes the right time is when the revenue dries up, quite seriously, because what may have worked really well 5 years ago, even a year ago, may not work well today. And so it's you have to know when you've bruised your head enough by beating it against the wall, and to say, okay, maybe this isn't working anymore. And you know, I hear a lot of people, they say, well, it worked before, it should work now. Not necessarily. It's like being in a relationship. What worked when Karen and I were together the first 6 months is not going to work 30 years into a relationship. It's a whole different, there's a whole different depth to it.
And you're two different people now, right?
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
like business.
So, you know, I would say that if revenues dry up, if an opportunity presents itself and you can step back and you can really analyze it and say, okay, based on my skill set, I really feel that this would be a great opportunity. But if you get that feeling of like you know, it's urgency is a good thing to have, but also if you have that do or die, like if I don't do it, my life is not going to work. That I say, step back, talk to some people, really analyze it, and look at the decisions you're making based on logic and intuition, but also, are you in a panic? Are you making decisions in a panic? Because when we make decisions in a panic, they often are going to be very expensive decisions that we've made, and they're not going to be profitable.
Amen.
But, and, you know, and I see this a lot in the live event space and in the coaching space where, you know, some people are masters on the platform of convincing people in the audience that if you don't buy my thing, your life is going to fall apart. And you just see people with this desperation that are like, I've got to have it, I've got to have it, I've got to have it. And sometimes with something like that, you need to give yourself a cooling off period.
Yeah.
And if you still feel that way after the cooling off period, then do it. But as far as when to make the change, sometimes it just shows up and the opportunity presents itself. Like this stuff that I'm doing within the plant-based industry, it's all based on skill sets that I have, but it's a whole different industry. And it's looking at it and saying, okay, is that a squirrel? Is that a, you know, a bright, shiny object? Or is that something I really should be doing?
Right, right. That's great advice. So talk for a minute about if you've ever had any challenges or negative feedback.
Right, that word challenges. No, never. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Specifically from being a lesbian and being the speaker and being, you know, selling products and those kinds of things. Any, you know, positive or negative?
Wow, that is such a great question. And I would say that if I have, some of it has not been apparent or I just choose to ignore it. You know, I'm trying to think because I'm so far removed from that mindset of like, as a lesbian, I don't have opportunities because I just see myself as a person. I create opportunity. And maybe I've just evolved to a point where I just don't pay attention if that's a reality. But I do know that I've come out on the platform. I mean, I've shared stories about my wife in environments that it's predominantly a straight audience. And I've never had anybody run out of the room going, ah, my God, she's a lesbian, I can't listen to her. I'm sure there are those experiences, but I also know that what we focus on, we tend to get more of. So if I'm focused on that people don't like me because I'm a lesbian, I'm going to create that. I'm going to see it. But if I just focus on the fact that I bring a lot of value to the experience, then that's what I'm going to see. And it's interesting because the majority of my client base they're not in the LGBTQ community at all. It's like, I have one client, she's LDS Mormon, and she's got 12 kids, 33 grandkids.
Wow.
She's been a client for probably 6-7 years, and she has invited Karen and I to come and stay at her home with her husband and her kids. I just have these clients that love me for who I am. And so I think that a lot of times that, yes, that is a reality because I go back to the days that, I drank a lot over that, but that was also a lot to do with how I felt about myself. I had a lot of shame around it. Yeah. And today, the fact that I can say, yeah, I've been with my wife 30 years, that's, for a lot of people, that's like 30 years you've been with your spouse. That's amazing. Yeah. They don't put it into, oh, she's a woman and that's why you've been with her for 30 years. It's like, no, you've made a relationship work.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's
So
great.
I don't really have I'm sure after we're done talking, I'll go, oh yeah, I remember the time. Wait, quick,
No,
put that
I
on.
think it's great. I mean, I love that. I love that. So let's, as we sort of come to the end of our time, let's talk a little bit about best business advice, either that you want to give or that you've ever gotten.
Oh, best business advice, I would say, is um, first of all, treat your business like a business. Be serious about it. And what that means is hook in with a community of people who are real business people. Like a life coach at the age of 18, I don't consider that a real business or a real life coach. I mean, at 18, it's pretty hard for most people to, even think their way clear through the day. But, and I'm not saying that as a judgment, I'm just saying that as a reality. There's something to be said for time in an industry. I would say look for a good mentor, but as you look for a mentor, there's plenty of resources that are available in most local communities. There's the Chamber of Commerce, there's SCORE, there's SBA, but also take what people say with a grain of salt, because everybody brings their perception, everybody brings their experience to the conversation. But I would say surround yourself with other people who are in business, who are succeeding. Be transparent. And the thing about transparency, that's why we have coaches and that's why we have mentors, is we can go to them and share things. Like when we're just not feeling it, we can talk to them. They can talk us off the ledge. I had one coach who was great at talking me off the ledge when I was doing these really big events. And she would just listen to what I had to say and say, okay, here's what I want you to do. Where airing your dirty laundry up on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn may not be the best thing to do, because not everybody understands the whole backstory behind it. But I would say also get an accountant, get a business license. Again, just treat your business like a business and look at who you're surrounding yourself with and look at the conversations that you're having. If you're around a lot of people who are saying how tough it is to run a business, the economy is slow, this sucks, that sucks, you need to change your playmates, because those language patterns do create the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. They do. Great advice. So socially, from with inside the queer community, what do you think are the sort of the big issues that either we should be dealing with that we're not, or that they're coming around, or that you think are a continuation of, what's happening?
I would say one thing for the younger people in the community: learn the history of the community, because you and I were talking about this earlier about, a lot of people don't even know who Harvey Milk is, and he was just a cornerstone of our history. They don't know what Stonewall really is about. So I would say learn the history, and this goes for the older men and women also. And I would say, be more inclusive. Don't think that you're the only one going through what you're going through, but also look at what again, it goes back to language patterns. What do you believe to be true? I remember going to a lesbian potluck, which is what we as lesbians do. We go to lesbian potlucks. And I remember talking to a few women about business, and I was saying something about, I don't know what I was even talking about. And they go, oh, you don't understand, Kathleen, you're just lucky. And they had real jobs. And I said, actually, I've worked pretty hard for what I have. And they just couldn't hear it. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to have this discussion with them, because we're here to have a barbecue. It's like, I'm not even going to try to convince them that there's hard work that goes into running a business. And, they were basing it on my home, my car, my spouse, all that. But I would say more than anything, just learn the history of the community and realize that we're all in this together. And it's not about separation from the straight community. It's about inclusion there too, because bottom line is every day is so precious. Let's make it the best that we can.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, what's the quote that I love so much is, luck is where preparation meets opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when you reach a certain level of success, people seem to forget that, the work that it took to get to that, right? It's like they're taking you're in front of the curtain scenes, and that's all they see. They forget about all the stuff that happen behind the scenes and all the work and struggle and, you know, all of that they're going through now, maybe you went through, right? To get where you are, but it all looks glamorous, you know?
You know, I can relate that to my relationship because people say, oh, you're so lucky that you've been with Karen for 30 years. And she's an amazing, amazing woman. She'd have to be with me for 30. Seriously. I mean, you know, how she's done it is beyond me. But they don't see the times that she literally went out and was making $7 an hour to put widgets in little bags to put food on our table while I was out being the motivational speaker and being the star in the family. They didn't see the times where we would sit there and go, how are we going to pay our mortgage this month? And they didn't see the time that when my mom was very ill and I was her caretaker driving from Oregon to California, 500 miles both ways, and I would go and stay for weeks on end, that Karen was taking care of everything. We have some property, we have horses, chickens, we have, you know, we have a mini little farm, and she was here taking care of all of that while I was out taking care of what I needed to. And so we've had to work at what we have. And it's just like in business, you know, it doesn't happen by chance, it happens by design. Yeah. And the more you design your systems to set yourself up for success, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah. Systems. I love that word.
Yep.
I love that word. Anything else that you want to add, or anything that any famous last words that you want to leave folks with that we didn't cover?
Oh, famous last words. Well, you know, I just want to say, first of all, Diane, thank you very much for inviting me here. And I encourage people, you know, go out and take some risks, you know, but make them really calculated risks. Like, you know, don't be a foolish risk and say, well, I'm going to jump off the bridge and hope for the best. It's like, jump off the bridge, but have some kind of a safety net that you're going to jump into. And the safety net would be the people you surround yourself with, the books that you read, the workshops that you go to, the friends that you have, but most of all, just the way you conduct your life day in and day out, because it truly is about systems, and it's about being accountable for what you say is your truth. And if you say you're going to do something, follow through on it.
Amen to that. Boy, we could do a whole session on
absolutely
do what you say you're going to do, right? Oh, well, that's great. Kathleen, give us your contact information. How do folks get in touch with you if they want to reach out? You know, part of what we're doing here at Queer Prophets is really about the community. And so I definitely want
Awesome. Thank you for asking. The first place they can go is Power Up for Profits, and that's plural, powerupforprofits.com. And if they want to find out more about what I'm doing in the plant-based world, go to plantbasedeatingforhealth.com. That's plantbasedeatingforhealth.com. You'll find all my contact on both those sites.
You know, it's interesting. I love it, right? You've got these long URLs. And I just had a conversation today with somebody who's like, oh, we need something short. And I'm like, why? It's that those URLs say exactly what it is that you do. It's not about short, it's about memorable. So I love
absolutely, absolutely. So
I love
this has been delightful. And I just really encourage people, go out and, you know, leave your mark. Go do what you have to do to leave your mark. But most of all, do it with integrity, because at the end of the day, you're the one who has to look at yourself in the mirror and do you like that person? And if not, make the changes so that you like that person.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much. As always, this has been just an amazing thing. It's great to reconnect with you. For everybody, go back and listen to this a couple of times, because I'm telling you, there were a lot of little tidbits, a lot of wisdom that was shared by Kathleen on this. So we will be back next time. Remember, again, just as I said, we hit on Queer Prophets podcast today, inclusion. Kathleen talked about it, inclusion inside the community, as well as inclusion of, you know, us as a whole, as a world, as a human species, if you will. So we're all about inclusion. We're all about, gosh, I just totally went blank. Community.
I can't read it. I wrote it down, but I can't read my own writing. Okay. This is something that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Inclusion, community, and growth are our three pillars. And we certainly talked about all of those today. So until next time, you guys, make it a great day. And we'll see you next time right here on Queer Prophets. I'm Diane Conklin.
And Kathleen Gage.